Jeff Rosales, your host on TVC here. Welcome back. We have an amazing guest here that we're going to talk about changing this narrative that we've been hearing about. There's a lot of myths that have been dispelled here on TVC and in the world and in America about who our leaders are. And a lot of folks are not aware of that. And I'm so excited to have on this guest, which is great timing, by the way. He's an award-winning journalist, news anchor on primetime networks in America, from Fox News to CNN to Univision. He's been in the business for over 30 years, America, and he's been changing this narrative ever since. So I'm so glad to be able to finally connect with him and talk about some of the current events and the topics, his leadership, and how we can change that narrative. So Rick Sanchez, welcome to TVC.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, and I love your background. I wish mine was a little more decorated, but I got my flag here, my Marine Corps hat here. Not as decorated as yours, but hopefully I'll get there one day. As far as your credentials and all the awards that you have gotten, sir. So thank you again for joining us here today.
No, it's actually an honor to speak to you and to speak to someone who's a Marine, and a person who's given so much of themselves for the sake of our country. I think the true people who we should in this country look to when we think of the military are people like you, are people like you, not the people in the State Department, not the people in the CIA, not the people who are running our government in either house, whether the Senate or Congress. In fact, I would say that those people are ants compared to people like you, who are really the true lions of our effort as Americans. And I really wish more Americans could understand why that's so important, because too often those horrible individuals that I just named, the idiots, the morons in our State Department, the morons in our Congress, the morons in highest echelons of government, use people like you to make us go, yay, when they're really not giving you, they're using you. When we salute that plane that goes by before a football game, when they ask us to salute our troops and, stand and rise for them, all which is a wonderful, virtuous task. What they're really doing is trying to propagate their crap, which is what it is. Their policies, which are often about making money, because their relationship is not with the troops. Their indebtedness is really not even with the troops. They use the troops to get us to suck into their crap. What they really want is to have relationships with Raytheon and the big military industrial companies who they really are beholden to and who they really work for, but they're not honest enough to fly the Raytheon flag at the football game. So they get somebody like you to go out there in a Marine uniform, and then everybody applauds. And I hate that. And it bothers me. And we've got to stop that.
I share your passion in that, because one of the things that, a lot of veterans we talk here in the community, Rick, is you mentioned foreign policy, right?
Yeah.
Billions of dollars are going to these forever wars when we have hundreds of thousands of veterans on America's streets. And people
who can't even get taken
that.
care of when they go into a VA hospital.
Correct.
You fought in Iraq, you gave everything, you go into a VA hospital, and they'll say, come back Tuesday, we might be able to see you. Man, that's bullshit.
Which is a darn grace. It's a national tragedy. A lot of folks don't know that over 100,000 veterans since 2001, Rick, have taken their lives by suicide. That's more than the previous 4 wars combined. And people say, well, what is wrong with them? Well, what do you think is wrong with them? We sent them to 4 wars: Vietnam, the first Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Of course, they're going to have challenges, but they should
missionless
their lives.
Missionless wars
because of a lack of leadership.
Correct. The boys who came back from World War II became stronger as a result of that experience, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who've come back from the wars you just mentioned did not come back better psychologically. and their mental health was skewed. And I would argue it was because one war had a mission, had a purpose, and the other wars, the guys were there. All my friends, my dear friends who were like in Iraq, for example, tell me, from the moment I got there, I looked around and I said, okay, what am I doing here? What the hell am I doing here? Am I here? What is my purpose here? You know? And they started having that mindset where they were filled with that turmoil of unsteadiness and unsureness, and no real direct mission or purpose. And as a result, it affected them not only in the moment, but later on as well. And that's kind of what we're faced with when we have wars and decisions that are made by our leaders to propagate something, not for the sake of America. And, you know, we could talk about any one of these in specifics, and I'd be glad to, whether it's Syria or Libya or Ukraine. None of these things are to defend America. They're to defend American interests, which often have to do with interest.
Yeah, you mentioned purpose, and I think purpose is a very big thing because, you know, I've deployed multiple times, right, from out of Fresno, California, multiple times to Afghanistan. But one of those deployments, my best friend in the Marine Corps, who's from Crescent City, and I always make fun of him. I'm like, well, you're from Oregon. You're not really from California. That's like at the tip of Northern California. But it was 120 degrees. We had been in some things there in Afghanistan, and at some point, you know, I had this thing on my mind. It's like, to your point, like, what are we doing here? And he pulled me aside and he said, you know what? It doesn't matter what they're doing externally. We just saved some lives today. Your brothers and sisters got to go home today. And that has stuck with me ever since. So that's why I'm so mission driven.
I hear that so much from my buddies who have served overseas. So when you ask them, you must have felt horrible. I mean, Afghanistan was a bit of a disaster because although the purpose was there at the beginning, maybe year 1 and year 2, the other 18 years were like, okay, what are we doing? What if we're going to wipe it out, wipe it out. But what's going on? Are the Taliban the good guys or the bad guys? And why are we negotiating with them? And why are we one day against them and one day they're on their side? I get it. So a lot of these guys would say to me, you know what we do, Rick? We watch out for ourselves. Our purpose becomes us. I have a buddy, and I'm gonna fight like hell to make sure that I get him back home. And you know, we have a squad, and I'm gonna make sure that our platoon is united, et cetera, et cetera. So you find the mission amongst yourselves. It doesn't come from the top, and man, that sucks. It should come from the top.
So you're right. You're right. So we always say from a leadership principle 101, you always lead by example.
Correct.
Every time a decision gets made in an organization or enterprise or government, it always starts at the top. So if you pass a policy on banning DEI or passing policy on taking a strategic land from people, there's going to be impacts. There's going to be impacts on the people on the ground that might be fighting for the country or fighting for that strategic territory. Or if you you ban a policy like DEI, people are going to get impacted economically, right? Workforce opportunities or career opportunities. And so I completely agree with you on that. And so one of the things for us is big that we stick together as a tribe, because in the service we are a tribe. Then when we get out, you know, corporate America kind of makes you forget about those things. It's all about individualism and me.
Oh yeah, they want you. It's like being Hispanic. There's a month in the year, I think it's October, when they celebrate us for 30 days. Okay, you get Hispanic Heritage Month. I think it's October. For these 30 days, we're going to give a shit about you. And that's it. It's like you're a soldier. You come back, you just fought like hell in Iraq. Hey, listen, we've got this event and we need you to put on your uniform and come out and hold the flag. And then when the event's done, we'll give you some coffee or something, but get the hell out of here. We don't even want to think about you again. And that's what it feels like sometimes to me.
Yes,
the way
it
that
does.
We treat our veterans.
It does. It does. So let's just talk about that topic real quick.
And by the way, let me add this one thing that I think is important too, because you were just talking about top down. And when you think of top down, you go back, and you're a lot smarter than I am about military history. So you've read about the Napoleons, who were there with their troops. You know, every time. Napoleon's one of the greatest leaders, not only because he was one of the greatest strategists, but also because he was able to inspire his troops personally there with them on the ground. George Washington Patton, MacArthur. We could go on and on. Now let's look at recent wars, okay? Who were the people who created the war in Iraq, for example? John Bolton, Bill Kristol, Benjamin Netanyahu. Those were the people who sent you there. Inspiring individuals? Dude, I don't
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah. I mean, and so that's always a very something we struggle with as leaders, because this is the difference between a manager and a leader. Is a manager is in charge of resources. Leaders are in charge of inspiring people, getting them to do something that they didn't even think they believe they can do themselves. If we had more leadership in America, I used to chair a council for veterans groups or Latino groups, and a lot of them didn't see themselves. They said, "Oh, well, I don't. That manager doesn't look like me, or that leader doesn't look like me." And I said, "Okay, this is what we're going to do." Right when I chaired the board, I brought in Fortune 500 CEOs or public and private sector leaders, brought them in to give them access and exposure and have talks with them and say, all right, I'm going to bring them to you and you guys do your part. Let's learn from them. Let's see how they navigate. It's about navigating, right? And a lot of them felt inspired by that. And I said, absolutely, you guys can do the same thing. But unfortunately, you're fed a narrative your whole life, and you got to understand you have to change that narrative. If you don't see yourself like them, then you're not going to become them. A lot of times people say, well, I'll see it when I believe it. Well, you know what? If you want to become it, let me bring that person to you and you guys can have a conversation together, right? And that's how we bridge the gap. It's about exposure, Rick, because if we don't get our kids, I'll give for example, I'm from Fresno, California, right? The agricultural capital of the world. We feed a quarter of the country and the world here, right? And you talk about history. Cesar Chavez roamed that ground. By the way, he was a Navy veteran. Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of people don't know that, Rick. And I think it's important for us to get a little more cultural understanding of just the impacts these people have had on our lives. And then I'll give you an example here, right? Me being from Fresno, south side of Fresno, growing up in a blue-collar neighborhood, my father was a bracero. A lot of folks don't know what braceros are. We're talking about illegal immigration. Well, guess what? During World War II, we had a wartime production shortage. America could not feed its people because the troops were all overseas fighting in World War II. So what happens is America gets an agreement with Mexico and says, you got a workforce, and we would love to partner with you to bring them over here. So we bring them over here. And what happens is agriculture throughput goes off the roof. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people get America gets fed. We stop the bleeding with wartime production shortage. And now all of a sudden we want to say, well, you know what? Thank you for your service. Let's go ahead and you should go back now, right? And so I would like to get your thoughts on that because I think it's a little interesting.
Well, first of all, let me just add something to what you were talking about when the way we see ourselves, because that's a really important part of this message. If there are people who are watching this podcast, and whether you're Latino or not Latino, but somehow you go into an environment where you think you don't belong or you demur because you don't think you're worthy, which happens to all of us at different times in our life. But somehow we as Latinos have a tendency to carry that with us. And a lot of it is economic. I mean, when you grow up, I grew up in a barrio in Hialeah, right? My parents were poor. My parents never made more than $11,000 a year combined income. So, but yet I struggled and I loved to learn, and I became a journalist. And eventually I was the first Latino in the history of the United States to be given a job working as a primetime anchor, news host, journalist. And my first real gig I was kind of a bit of an icon in South Florida. I was the most known and most watched television news anchor in South Florida at a local station here in Miami, which is a pretty big deal. But then I did so well that the networks came and said, well, if he can do that there, maybe we'll bring him up there. So NBC gave me a job. And I went to New York to start working at NBC, and I felt that thing that we all feel. Suddenly I was surrounded by Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings and Tim, whatever the heck his name is, who used to do Meet the Press. And I was interviewing the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense and all these people who were just so, and in my mind, I immediately thought to myself, this is a world that I don't belong in. I can't hold up to these individuals. They're all so much smarter than me. They're all so much better than me. They're all so much more educated than me. After all, I mean, I'm from Barrio and Hialeah. These guys are all from Harvard and Yale and stuff like that. And, you know, today I call bullshit on that and on myself for thinking that way, because I've now learned that most, if not almost all of those people and those entities that I put in some unbelievable esteem, you know, how dare I criticize NBC News? How dare I criticize the Defense Department or the State Department or whatever these people were, or these top generals from the Pentagon, some of which have sold out too, by the way, and I can name names. Now I realize I'm more able. I am just as smart, if not smarter, just as prepared, just as moral, just as intelligent as they are. And somewhere in our lives, we need to cross that border. We need to get ourselves from a value standpoint and from a skill standpoint where we can say that. And the moment you cross that line, it's one of the most freeing experiences that you'll ever have. But it's hard for a lot of us because we didn't grow up and we didn't have an easy shot to get into Harvard. We didn't get automatically into any school. We had to work so hard, and we had to look around and see an environment that was not like that. And we tend to cast it upon ourselves when in actuality, we need to think, even if you don't have all the knowledge and all the skills set, I am capable of getting them. I will get them, and I will be just as good as all these people around me. That's a really important process.
Yes, it is. And it starts with saying, I am already qualified. Yes. I already came into this earth already qualified. My creator brought me into this world. Many times,
nos ponemos los pantalones igual que el otro. Exactly.
Exactamente.
We put our pants on just like the other guy.
We're seeking external validation from people who probably don't care about you, instead of seeking internal validation from ourselves. And once you understand that, you'll understand that it's a spiritual battle that we are in. And it starts with how you speak, what you think, who you surround yourself with, the people that are in your lives. And once you get that alignment, spiritual and strategic alignment, then you'll understand. But if not, if you come into this world like a migrant, like my father's bracero, and you come in for economic well-being, and then you're told top down that you're just this person that's picking crops, then you're just going to think you're that person picking crops.
No.
Right?
Forget that. No. It's even more than that in many ways, I think, because you know what it is, Jeff? I think in many ways what it is it's like the animal kingdom. If you're out in an African jungle and one lion smells another lion and he smells fear, he immediately is going to reduce that lion number 2 to a position of weakness. So the other, Rick Sanchez, 23, 24, 20, whatever the hell I was, 25 years old, arrives in New York City with a $1 million a year job working for NBC as an anchorman on MSNBC or whatever it was I was. I am a frightened lion suddenly going amongst other lions, and those lions are all there. They have manes, and I show them that because I feel that, right? Now, whatever I feel is about to be doubled or tripled by the reaction I'm going to get from those guys. They're going to smell it. They're going to smell your weakness. They're going to smell your sense of fear, and they're going to pound on you. And before you know it, you're going to be less able to succeed because of that, as you said, external pressure, coupled with your own internal liabilities. So
I faced that.
Like the law of the jungle, man.
Yeah, so I faced that in corporate America once I came back from Afghanistan, got my undergrad in business, and my first corporate job. For me, I'm all about building relationships and networks. And what I was doing, I was building and finding out how the whole organization works together, how sales, marketing, finance, the products. Like you guys all got to talk to each other because that's what
creating your value, right?
Creating value. But then it got to the point where I had a manager or supervisor was complaining because I was getting feedback from the other department, and he complained to the manager and said, "Well, I just want Jeff to sit in his desk all day in his cubicle and just shut up and be quiet." I said, "Okay, resignation 2 weeks later. I'm not doing that. That's just not what I do." But I struggled because there was a lot of doublespeak in the corporate and business world, right? And somebody says one thing and they do another thing. And that was a challenge because that was really hard to navigate. I said, hold on, we're all about integrity, right? That the military teaches us, or even spiritually teaches integrity, doing the right thing, leading by example. And then when you get to the corporate business world, you throw that all out the water because now you're like, hold on, can I trust you? Are you going to throw me under the bus, as they call it? And so that's a challenge for a lot of us coming out of the service, Rick. And I'm sure it sounds like you kind of went to some of that same process where that line analogy that you gave.
Well, we all do because of where we, when you listen, whether you were some, black kid who grew up in a tough environment in a so-called ghetto, as they call them, or a so-called barrio if you're a Latino kid, or wherever you come, or you're like JD Vance and you come from you come from a hillbilly environment. Any place where you come from, where you're carrying that pain with you that says, I don't belong, I'm not as good. Two very important words to attack before you do anything else in this life. If you guys are listening to us and you're a young man or a young woman and you understand what I'm saying, where you don't feel as good, that's the first thing you got to attack. You got to make yourself good, because if in your head you don't get it, they're not going to get you. My dad always said, the people will only see you the way you see yourself, son. And if you go out there and you pound that stake into the ground and said, I am here, this is my value, they will see your value. But if you're out there and you're afraid, they're not going to see your values. So,
yes.
So the first thing we got to do, and that's just forget about even going. For you, it's doubly hard because you guys, interestingly enough, this is what the construct of the military is. You got to be beaten down a little bit. You're going to be led, and you're somewhat made to be powerless in terms of your ability to, make decisions, because that's just the way the military structure works. So you're already a Latino kid, or you're a black kid, or you're a hillbilly kid, or you're a whatever kid, from a rough situation. You don't feel all that good about yourself. You're wondering whether you're good enough to be there. And then somebody's mandándote, mandating you to do everything where it doesn't come from you. Now you get out of the military and you still have the original thing. And you're tussling with the fact that the only reason you succeeded in the military was because some guy who outranked you told you what to do every day. I don't know. It's your experience, but maybe I'm just asking you. That must make it a little harder than to come out of that cycle.
So I appreciate that question. And so let me go back. Let me just tell you quick about my father, right? Late father Bracero. We lost him to cancer in 2016. But he had the greatest work ethic that you could ever determine. He was a man who would always, he was like a drill instructor. Like on Sundays,
my dad too.
He'd always get us up and say, okay, we're all going to go to church together. And that worked for until I became about 16. Then I tried to find a way to escape out of it, right? And go spend the night at my friend's house because I was like, I'm not doing this, Dad. And I would go to the flea markets with him.
We all do that, but go on. Yeah,
but he was the wisest man I can think of. And the reason why is because here's the thing. He lived a life of long suffering, Rick. He grew up in Mexico. And so at age 3, lost his mom, right? And
my dad too.
He was raised by a stepmom and his dad. And my grandpa, which is unfortunate, used to drop my dad as a form of punishment on rocks, living in the rancho that time frame. And, he worked in Mexico City. He fell down from 100 feet, working on the railroads. We thought he was going to die. And we said, Dad, you know what? You have 9 lives, because lost his mom, lost 3 kids in infancy, lost his wife, comes to LA, marries my mom, starts another family. And before me, my mom had a miscarriage, right? And then luckily that next person was me that came, and I was the final child. I was the youngest out of everybody there. But the man learned so much wisdom from those sufferings, right? Because he would always call things on TV, and you were probably on the Univision because he watched the Univision all the time. And he'd always say, well, look at this cochinada. And now I was like, why do you call it that? But what he was really saying is, this is all propaganda. This is hogwash. Yeah, this makes no sense. And that was his way of saying it. But his wisdom, his discipline, his work ethic Rick, is something that we all have instilled in us. And I always tell people, Kobe Bryant.
Draw on that. Draw on that.
Yeah, Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant. My sports, because I'm from LA. I was born in East LA, raised in Fresno, but the Lakers did so well. And Kobe Bryant was somebody that I looked up to growing up. And one thing I'll never forget that he said, Rick, he said when he got to the league, that he found out that everybody dropped their packs, meaning they're already getting their fat paychecks. He said, all I had to do was just 2% better, and I could become the top NBA player in the NBA because of his work ethic. It's the same thing with our community. We just got to do a little better because guess what? We have to be 10 times better. We don't have that opportunity to fail. We have to succeed, right? Get rich or die trying.
There's a famous saying that I've always adhered to, which is, and I think it's something that's very actionable for most people who grew up like you and I, and that is when you go into any environment, there's always going to be somebody who might be smarter than you. There's always going to be somebody who might be more educated than you. There's always going to be somebody who might be taller than you, faster than you, because that's just the way the world is. But there's one thing you can always outdo anybody in, and that's work. That's work. You can't be as tall as the next guy, but you can outwork the next guy. You may not be as educated because your parents couldn't afford to send you to Harvard or Yale, but you could outwork that guy. And that's the thing that you learn from your father, which has made you a successful person. And that is one of the attributes that happens to be a very Latino attribute. We enjoy a good day's work. We enjoy the satisfaction of looking back after 8 hours, or usually in our case, 10 hours, and looking and saying, wow, that looks good. I did a nice job on that, and that's one of the values that we bring to this country, to this world, without having to necessarily work on it too much. And that's a good thing. But then we got to buy into it ourselves. And that's where we falter, where we have a hard time selling it. Whereas some other guys do, even though they're full of crap.
Yes. And you mentioned the lion concept. And so I saw this video, and I have to send it to everybody here after the show. But he was talking about, he said, why I don't understand. Why are lions so respected? They're small. They're not that fast. They're big. But every time an elephant sees a lion, he says, oh, I better watch out, right? They're the most feared and respected animal because the lion has a spiritual type of power to him, right? And if you have a spiritual type of power, you'll understand it. Just like David. David said, I don't need all this fancy armor on me. I'm just going to go throw my slingshot and go and kill Goliath. And that's what he did. So true. But a lot of times we forget that. And so every time we see what's on TV or on this phone, we're looking at people who are just feeding us information, but it's a spiritual war. And so I always tell my nephew or family members and say, you know what? Pick up a book, learn about people like Roy Benavides, right? Let's talk about Roy Benavides because he reminds me of a lion. We were talking about it earlier, Rick. A lot of people don't know who Roy Benavides is. Medal of Honor recipient.
Isn't that crazy?
Mexican American, grew up in Texas.
And there was a movie named after him, wasn't there?
Yeah, no, not really.
Exactly. But they copied his life and made a movie, and it was called
Rambo. Exactly. Many don't know about Roy Benavides, who next month is the anniversary of when Reagan gave him the Medal of Honor. Let me just real quick in a nutshell tell you who Roy Benavides is. Medal of Honor recipient, grew up in Texas, Mexican and Native American, orphaned, joins the military, was only like 5'7", ends up going to special forces in the Army, and I'm a little sad because I wish he would have went Marine Corps, but there's a story behind that. But anyway, he ends up going to Vietnam multiple times. And on one mission in Vietnam, Rick, the man took a knife to a gunfight. And they always say, wait, you don't ever take a knife to a gunfight. But Roy was already a lion. He said, I don't care. I'm going to take whatever I have because I have men that are pinned down and I'm going to go and save them. He ends up getting all these bullet wounds and taking and getting attacked by the enemy to the point where they actually put him in a body bag. And this is so typical Latino. That's why I was laughing because we have a dark sense of humor. When they were zipping him up, Rick, The medic was zipping him up, and one of his guys said, "Hey, you know what? I think he might still be alive. You should go check on him." So the guy's like pulling the body bag, the zipper down, and Roy goes, the biggest loogie ever, and says, "I'm still alive." He spits in the medic's face. And I said, that is a typical Latino. That's something my father would do, right? Like, I'm still alive. And I thought, and so his story is so inspiring, but many of us don't know about him, Rick, because these platforms, we don't know them. They don't show characters like a Roy Benavides. They show typical, characters that are mainstream. And so we got to find a way to change that. Rick, so what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I mean, that's one of my biggest pet peeves living in this wonderful country that I love so much. And the fact that we're like 64 million strong, speaking just as Latinos in general. And, please, those of you who are, big MAGA people and are worried about the border and stuff, I understand the border issues, and I am not here to say that we should open our borders, and I'm not here to say that every human being who comes to the United States is worthy of admiration simply because of the fact that he came to the United States. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is this, and understand me. There are some 60 million people in the United States who happen to be Latino. Many of those people have been in the United States since before the United States became the United States. Some of those people were the actual first pilgrims to this country, because the Hispanics who came to the United States in St. Augustine and Santa Fe, New Mexico, were celebrating Thanksgiving and holding Mass 60 years before the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Rock. So please understand that. That's part of the argument. The other part of the argument is that these 60 million people, I think I said 1,000, I meant million, who are in 60 million people who are part of the 300 million people who live in the United States, and growing, by the way, tend to be the people who are least apt to commit a crime, the people who are more apt to own their own house, more apt to start a business, more apt to go to church, more apt to believe in traditional family values. And don't believe me, go to the Pew Center that does public polling and look at these polls, and they will confirm everything that I just said. So they are a people who have given so much to this country, and nothing among those things is more important than their service to this country. I have said this before, and you quoted me earlier, and I'll say it again for those of you who don't understand. It has gotten to the point where Latinos over-index in the military of the United States of America. So much so that recently a Marine commandant was quoted saying, we've got to stop just recruiting Latinos. We've got to apagar la pila, shut off the valve for Latinos going into the military because we've got too many of them. I mean, our whole military is basically the people who are fighting for our country are, for the most part, over-indexing as Latinos. If we are, 20% of the population of the United States, Latinos in the military like 30 or 35%. So what does that tell you? Are these people that we want to treat badly, castigate, kick out, for lack of a better term? And again, I'm not talking about the spirit of dealing with the immigration crisis, because I understand that is a crisis and it should be dealt with. I'm not arguing with Mr. Trump in that regard. I'm arguing with tone. I'm arguing with understanding. I'm arguing with trying to make a problem so simple that it's just about they're bad, we're good, get them out, when it should be, how did we get to this place and how do we make it better? And that's the point that you and I need to make.
So very, very good point here. And just for everyone listening here, there has been over 60 Medal of Honor recipients from the Latino community. And the most recent one is General Cavazos, right? Army General from the Cavazos family, had a base named after him called Fort Cavazos here. So our contributions are very significant. And by the way, over a fifth of Medal of Honor recipients are immigrants. A lot of immigrants have served, to your point, since the founding of America.
Yeah.
George Washington was an immigrant. By the way, he's one of the only presidents to set foot on the battlefield. We haven't had a president set foot on the battlefield ever since, right? And there's a lot of topics and discussions around that in itself.
Hold on. Yeah, JFK. JFK served in World War II and was shut down.
Sure. That's true.
George Bush, the senior, was in World War II. Actual presidents who served. There have been, obviously, ¿cómo se llama? Andrew Jackson served in the Mexican War.
So you're right.
He killed Mexicans,
which is unfortunate. You're right. I think the point what I'm making here though is presidents that have been on the battlefield in the front lines. Like he was fighting for a revolution, right? So he became a president. He was a business owner, and then he became the president of the United States, right? That's where I'm getting. We don't have that as much anymore.
Well, here, let me help you. Recently, good luck.
Right.
Let's go back. Trump, Obama, Biden, Clinton, Reagan, don't even think so. Carter, yes. Carter was on a submarine in the Pacific Ocean, which I guess you're a Pacific. You're an engineer. I mean, you're an engineer on a submarine. I guess you're serving. I don't want to be in a submarine. Those things scare the hell out of me.
So
he's like claustrophobic. I mean, the guy say, "Sácame de aquí."
So I've talked to sub guys before. They're a little interesting, but yes, Reagan did serve as well. So yeah, to your point, you're right. You're right about that. That is true. I think
not recently. Yeah,
true.
Recently, none of them. Yeah.
Okay, so real quick, you mentioned African Americans, right? And I think this is another thing as well because all of a sudden we're not going to have Black History Month next month. So let me just tell you guys about a fellow Marine who is one of the most qualified individuals right now that we're working on actually to get the Medal of Honor. His name is Major James Capers Jr. His family, he's son of a sharecropper during the Jim Crow era, and his family faced persecution. So they ended up going. They were in South Carolina. They went to Baltimore. He joins the Marine Corps, marries his wife, becomes part of Marine Corps Special Operations, and he deploys to Vietnam. When he deploys to Vietnam, a lot of the officers died, and he became the first African American to receive a battlefield commission in Vietnam. The man in one mission was wounded 19 times to save the lives of his men. And he was nominated for the medal. Oh, he actually became the face of the Marine Corps right after civil rights integration. So there's this famous poster called Ask a Marine. That handsome gentleman, that's Major James Capers, who's 87 years old today. He was nominated twice, Rick, for the Medal of Honor, and he was downgraded 2 levels. So the man has a documentary about him. The man has a book about him. And now we want to see the guy get the Medal of Honor. And guess what? He is now returning back to the place where he faced persecution from in the state of South Carolina, because he was saying, well, they're hurting a little bit in the economy. So me being a war hero, of course they're going to want me back. So right now we're focused on trying to get him the Medal of Honor, but he's one of the most qualified individuals, got hurt, and yet he still can't get the Medal of Honor, Rick. Like there's something there about that, right? If you've done all those things, so why aren't you being honored with that recognition? Is it because we don't want to face the music and say, well, if we give him the Medal of Honor, then what are we saying about ourselves? Because we waited 60 years later to give it to him. We should have gave it to him right there and then. So I think we have some work to do, Rick, as far as recognition and changing the face of those who are actually doing the work, to your point.
Yeah, it goes back to the thing that you and I started the conversation with. There's a huge distance between the people who fight and the people who send them to fight. And never before, I think, in our history has that void been larger. And it really worries me. When I said guys like, John Bolton and Bill Kristol were the guys who devised the invasion plan for Iraq. These were the guys who actually created the strategy for Iraq. Who are these people? They've never been soldiers. They're generally cowards. They're connected to operations to make money off of this war. They're more interested in the oil and the proceeds than they were in the honor and the need for America to do such a thing. And in the end, God is good, because look what he proved to those people, that you did something without a purpose. You did something without a mission. You did something without value. And it turned into, as we would say, una mierda. I mean, it did more harm to the Middle East than good to the Middle East, because it was put together by people who didn't come with a purpose that came from the right place. So it's kind of the same thing. I will always honor and cherish our troops, but the people who are running our troops these days, I have got very serious doubts about them. And that's the thing that we have to, at some point, attach our attention to. And unfortunately, the media is not going to help us because they're being paid by not the troops. They give troops, whatever. But the people they really work for are the Raytheons, are the General Dynamics, are these companies who have their connections in some of the upper echelons of the State Department and the Pentagon.
So
that's the God's honest truth, man.
I agree with you. Like I said, I think you have a fair point here, and I think we need to get to a point though where we have to tell these stories, and we have to be our own media, if you will, which is what we're doing right now, and change that narrative. Because if not, it's going to be the same status quo. We're not status quo guys. We're not. Jesus Christ, not a status quo guy, right? He's not a status quo guy. Billions of people follow him today, and I think we need to continue breaking the status quo. If not, our children or our children's children, our communities are going to continue listening to the same voices. When in fact, these diverse voices right here, we have a lot to bring to the table. And let's just talk about economics, if you will, right? America, supposed to be the number one GDP in the world by some numbers, by some organizations saying that. And I'm here on the other side that China is. And so if I was a president, I would think about how can I get more innovators on the field and create more competition so that way there's more innovation. So we're not speaking Mandarin in 20 or 30 years from now, right? So we can actually work together as a country so we can get more production out of the economy. Because right now, 2/3 of our economy is consumer services. We're not producing anything anymore. We've outsourced it. So how do we find a way to bring that back and get more people on the field? And oh, by the way, the throughput of the economy is going to go out the roof. And that would probably alleviate some of these social issues that we're facing right now. Because guess what? Some people are saying that the middle class might go away. There might just be a rich and poor situation in the next coming years.
And we're getting pretty close to an oligarchy right now.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're right about China. The real GDP growth for China right now stands at between 4% and 5%. The real GDP growth for India is about 6 to 7%. They're really popping. And while you're also right that the total GDP for the United States is still higher than both of those countries, our real GDP growth is only at 3%. It's stagnant and has been stagnant for a very long time, which means, do the math. You don't have to go to MIT to figure this out. That means within the next 5 to 10 years, both India and China will pass us, and we will become the number 3 economy in the world. And there may be soon countries coming up behind, bringing up the rears, as they say, after that. So that's a reality. That's not, you and I just, coming up with stuff. Anybody listening to my voice right now is welcome to look that up, and you'll see it. So that's really an important part of what's going on in this country. And, again, going back to speaking as a Latino, because I happen to be one, we're not the only ones who do good work or work hard in this country, obviously. But more recently, because we happen to be the youngest demographic in the country, the average Latino is about 27 to 28 years old, where the average African-American is 30s, the average, true value of, an Anglo-American, so to speak, is about in the 40s. So because we're younger, we tend to have more jobs. The average Latino works more than 2 jobs, or pretty close to it, like 1.9, I think, or something like that. The average non-Latino in the United States works less than 1 job. So, the people who are doing a lot of hard work in this country for some reason, and it could be not because we're any better than anybody, it's a conditional situation, happen to be Latinos. They happen to be us, happen to be the Hispanic population of the United States, tends to be the one that does most of the work, statistically speaking. That's important and something that should be at least recognized, and maybe we build off of that somehow. But instead, you're right, we're creating companies where instead of using that wonderful workforce that we have, some people are suggesting we get rid of it, and others are saying, why do we need Latinos? We can just have the Chinese do all of our jobs. Well, yeah, that's fine, But what you're creating is a Chinese power base that's going to be essentially more powerful than ours if you continue down that road. That's where we are.
I agree. And the perfect example, right? $500 billion is going to be invested in this AI initiative in America. And the Chinese just created like their own version of Chat GPT called DeepSeek with like 7 people at $5 million budget. It didn't cost them billions of dollars. And now all of a sudden we're saying, oh, well, that's a national security threat. We're going to have to ban that too as well. It's like, look, America, get more people out on the field. We got some innovators here. Like,
yes.
and just, we have to get rid of that fear and uncertainty. If you want a country to prosper and win this century or this millennia, you're going to have to work with the people you already have on the field. You've already made investments in them. I always tell people, you look at the DACA recipients, they're saying, well, we might want to kick out the DACA. A lot of the DACA recipients have bachelor's degree. They're working at Goldman Sachs or all these big Fortune 500 companies. So why would we give Mexico or Latin America invested, skill-based talent back, America? We have to get rid of that fear and uncertainty and trust people and leaders like Rick or myself to do the right thing here and find a way to make us more economically powerful. Everybody wins. I believe in a win-win situation. We don't have to have this zero-sum game.
But what's interesting? Like, this conversation that you and I are having is very unique, and it shouldn't be. What a shame that more people can't hear or have conversations like the ones that we're having, because we're having a conversation that's transparent, that's real, that's honest, and that is saying just as much good stuff as there is bad stuff, etc. And unfortunately, in our country right now, the powers that be have created 2 factions. One that speak with I don't know, for lack of a better term, a Republican point of view, and another one with a Democrat point of view, and they're both full of crap. But as long as they can continue that fight between those folks, speaking in these idealistic, symbolic terms, rather than talking about the real issues like you and I were just talking about, then it becomes stifling and nothing gets solved. It's all about name calling, and I'm better than you, and those people are bad, and those people are good. And what a shame, because we're all Americans, and we're better than just a stupid ideology assigned to us by some party, especially when those parties are being ruled by some of the most corrupt human beings in the history of our country. People who have a $170,000 a year job and end up 5 years later being multimillionaires worth $30 million, $40 million. Well, how the hell in a job that pays $170,000 did you end up with $40 million? Oh, gee, I wonder what they did. Well, they're corrupt. And those are the people who are setting these false narratives, these arguments that we get into without having real discussions like the ones that you and I have just had.
Thank you. And I agree. And let's definitely talk a little about this last topic, because I'm very respectful of your time here, is leadership. Again, going back to the media and the narrative. I hate when people call themselves or leaders or say that people are leaders, because I feel like it's being diluted. Yeah. So if you see the same people talking, and they talk, and we used to say, my father used to say, it's in the scripture as well, you'll know a tree by its fruit. Sometimes not every tree produces good fruit, or sometimes they produce bad fruit. So if you hear somebody talking all the time, don't watch what they say, watch what they do.
Exactly.
If somebody is setting policies that is going to impact your community, and you're not paying attention to that because, your work ethic, you're working 12 hours a day, you need to pay attention to these things, because guess what? It impacts your community, especially Latino or African American, where they make up about 7 to 10 trillion of the GDP of America. Then that's not an exaggerated amount, but that's an estimate here, right? Yeah. And we're gonna need them to work together here. And Rick, I agree with you. I think we need to find a way to empower each other and amplify each other's voices, because if we don't do it, who's gonna do it for us, right?
Well, and yeah, I guess we can close on this, because I think it's probably the most important message of all. And that is something you and I learned from our fathers. And that is, it's what you do when no one's looking. And that's called principles. And unfortunately, you're right. We call our senators our leaders. Bullshit. Those guys are leaders. Sure, they're leaders. By the way, they get elected because they collect more money from certain very small percentage of individuals, always the same people who are less than 1% of the population of the United States. And they put them in office so they can stay in office, like McConnell, who looks like he's going to die tomorrow in office, or Biden, or Nancy Pelosi, or Boxer, or whatever the hell her name was. These people who are like 100 years old, and they've been in that job, and they're multi-millionaires, filthy rich. And yet that's who our media tells us are our leaders. That's who our media tells us that we have to look up to. I say, hell no. I say we look up to people who've proven themselves to us because of their actions, because of their mores, and because of their principles. Because those are the people who will create a better America for us. It's not going to be the guy who just happens to have the job that was probably given to him by a bunch of people who paid him off. And that's the real conundrum that I think we find ourselves in right now in America.
And so I'm glad you mentioned it, and I'll end with this, and I don't know how you feel about him, but I'm going to say just one example about President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador. He was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and there's one piece of the segment where Tucker Carlson, in his fashion, was saying, wait, you put your guys' economic plan on seeking God's wisdom? And Nayib says, why not? And a couple months earlier, actually back in December, October, what I found out was El Salvador discovered gold in their country that they can mine.
Wow.
So seek God's wisdom first and let all these other things come to you, ladies and gentlemen. So Rick perfectly example about principles, because Nayib also, by the way, cleared up the crime, and then America was upset because it made America look bad. So Nayib has these fresh ideas. To your point, we need more leaders in government, more leaders in business, because they have fresh ideas and we can change up the system. I always tell people, if we found a way to partner more with Latin America instead of attacking them, imagine how more prosperous we could all be together. Talk about setting up a supply chain, having production factories there instead of outsourcing it because you want to increase shareholder value. But that doesn't increase American value. That only increases shareholder value for the select few.
Exactly.
So we need to find a way to do it.
And you should add, because NAFTA didn't work in that sense, makes more of those people want to come here because we've ruined their countryside and their economy.
So yes, you're right about the foreign policy side. And that's a whole nother topic we can talk about.
We'll do that next time.
But Rick, real quick, tell us about this amazing new project that you have called Journalistically Speaking, so we can all follow you and support you.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I do. I'm a journalist. I've got. I was a part of 2 Peabody Award-winning teams. I've got a DuPont, 4 Emmys. Worked at CNN, worked at Fox, worked at NBC. Interviewed 4 U.S. presidents. Interviewed Fidel Castro. Interviewed Mikhail Gorbachev. Interviewed Manuel Noriega in prison behind bars. So I guess what I'm trying to say with all of that is I'm a real journalist. I'm a real, honest to goodness journalist with gravitas, just like you're a real soldier. There's too many people right now in our profession who aren't journalists. Turn on MSNBC, turn on CNN, turn on Fox. Those people aren't journalists. Those people were chosen for a specific reason. Many of them actually come from the government. They're former spokespersons for presidents and associations and agencies. So they've gone from propagating government information to now being the information person in the news. Something really wrong with that. That's not the way we're supposed to challenge our government, not espouse its ideas as journalists. So it's because of that and pride of what my craft is and what I believe in, which is truth, that I've decided to do a podcast that I call Journalistically Speaking, because it's time for real journalists to do real jobs in America, because there's too many lies being propagated as we speak.
Thank you, Rick. And real quick, ladies and gentlemen, you guys can scan this QR code or go to leonmedianetwork.com and you will find this podcast on there. I have to give a shout out to Michael Leon. Thank you so much, man, for this opportunity to interview Rick. Rick, I appreciate it. I feel like we're going to have a couple more segments going forward, man, and continuing this dialogue. But I want to thank you again for just taking the time again.
And I'm glad Michael hooked us up. You're right. I'm glad Mike Leong hooked us up because this has been a good experience for me as well. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. God bless.